Welcome to the Thinking Practitioner Podcast,
a podcast where we dig into the fascinating issues, conditions, and quandaries in the massage and manual therapy world today.
I'm Whitney Lowe.
And I'm Til Luchau.
Welcome to the Thinking Practitioner.
The Thinking Practitioner podcast is supported by ABNP Associated Bodywork and Massage Professionals. ABNP membership gives professional practitioners like you a package including individual liability insurance, free continuing education, and quick reference apps, online scheduling, and payments with Pocket Suite, and much more. ABNP's CE courses, podcast, and Massage and Bodywork magazine always feature expert voices and new perspectives in the profession, including Whitney Lowe and myself, Til Luchau. Thinking Practitioner listeners can save on joining ABNP at abnp.com/thinking. Are you ready to take your skills to another level? Come check us out at advanced-trainings.com. Whether you've been practicing for decades or are just starting out, Advanced Trainings offers a wide range of online and in-person programs designed to boost your effectiveness, deepen your understanding, and inspire your professional creativity. With innovative self-paced programs ranging from 1-hour certificate courses on the most common client complaints to our comprehensive CAMT certification program, we offer practice-changing learning events with industry-leading instructors and a supportive learning community that will take your work to another level. Plus, for a limited time, Thinking Practitioner listeners like you can enjoy a special offer. Sign up today at advanced-trainings.com and get a free month of our amazing AT subscription. Explore our extensive library of courses, cancel anytime, and keep your credits, all from just $20 a month, with the first month free for TTP listeners like you. Enter Thinking Subscriber at checkout for this limited time offer at advanced-trainings.com. Thank you.
My guest today, I'm excited to be talking to both of you. I'll hear from you in a second, but I just want to say a thing about each of you. Sharon Wheeler, I learned recently, you were just 23 years old when you were teaching Esalen massage at the Esalen Institute, and when you started studying with Dr. Ida Rolf, the founder of Rolf Structural Integration, and you eventually developed your own methods, ScarWork and BoneWork. So nice to be here with you today. Thanks for coming, Sharon.
Thank you for having me on.
And then Wojtek Cackowski, you've been a guest here on our podcast before, and you and I have done a lot of things together. You have a long list of credentials, but amongst others, being a physical therapist, a manual therapist, a structural integration instructor in Tom Meyer's Anatomy Training School, instructor here at Advanced Trainings. You've also worked a lot with Sharon. So thank you for joining us today as well.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Happy to be here.
And Sharon, you're joining us from Taipei, where you've had a long day. So thank you for making the time here. I'm in Boulder. Wojtek, are you in
Thailand this time?
Yes. Great. Okay, I wanted to hear a bit, Sharon, about some of your time at Esalen. I want to hear a little bit about your work. I want to hear, Wojtek, what it's been like to work and learn with Sharon. I was at Esalen in the 80s, and that's what got me started on this path of hands-on work. You were there in the 70s. You were there in 1970 even.
And
What was in
I started out 67.
67? How did you find your way to Esalen? What was that like then? What's your Esalen?
Well, I was in college, was doing my best not to graduate because I was on the GI program. So I'd had 4 years of junior college, and I was just going to keep going until I was 28 years old, studying everything. So I was changing my major on a regular basis so I could just stay in school. It was wonderful. It was a great exploration. And on the weekends, I would go dancing in San Francisco. And it was the Haight-Ashbury days, from, I would say, somewhere around 65, 66, 67. Those were the years that I was there. And I loved to dance. I absolutely loved to dance. And my high school roommate, Nancy, had also found her way to San Francisco. And we used to have lots of fun. Now, she knew everybody in the Haight-Ashbury. I didn't really, but I loved to go dancing. So on the weekends, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, I would be over there having a great time. And I ran into a fellow who felt the same way I did about dancing. And he was from Esalen. His name was Lars Larson.
I asked Lars. I actually house sat for Lars in his little cabin in Big Sur there for quite a while.
Was that the one that believer?
It was it was on stilts hanging over the edge of the cliff.
Oh,
It was actually
wasn't it still? It was cantilevered.
it was cantilevered out over the cliff, and so Lars was a practitioner there at the Esalen Institute.
Yeah.
He's the one that introduced you to the place, huh?
Yes, he did. And, at first he said, we've got to come to Esalen and meet all my friends. And I said, Big Sur? I said, that's foggy, cold, and awful. I've been down there a lot. No, thanks. I wouldn't go. And finally he says to me, my friends don't believe I have a girlfriend. So I said, oh, all right, I'll come down. And I almost didn't show up because of Fritz Perls. Fritz Perls was, this was midnight, New Year's Eve. And it turns out, this is kind of fun, it turns out that my boyfriend knew the cook. That was important at Esalen. It wasn't so much that if you did workshops, you were important, as if you knew the cook and you liked you. And he would allow you in his, and I was allowed in the kitchen. That was nice, and so was he. So we go in, and my first time seeing one of these Esalen gatherings, everybody had their arms around each other, the shoulder, big circle of people. We kind of snaked through the whole kitchen, around the kitchen island and everything. And I looked at that, I stopped and I looked at that and went, well, gosh, I've never seen anything like this. And then I thought, well, they just had their arms around each other's waist or shoulder, and they're swaying back and forth, making probably an ohm. I didn't know what they were doing. So I walked into that, and two people looked back and saw us come into the door and held out their arms. So that's where we stepped in the circle. And Fritz Perls was on my right. And we go into the circle, and the next thing I know, Fritz has his hand coming up my shirt. Because he did that sort of thing. Yes, it wasn't really nice. And because he was shorter than me. And I said, excuse me? And he just gave me a little smile and kept that hand coming. And I thought, okay, buddy, when that finger gets up to the point of where I can trap it with my elbow, I'm going to break it. And so I let him get up to my rib cage. And then I caught him with my elbow, and I did my very best to break his fingers. And he finally got his hand out from underneath me, and I was grinding back and forth and smiling at him. And then he finally gets his hand out, and he held his hand and gave me the most wounded expression. I have to admit, it was an interesting rush of energy that went from my feet all the way up to my head, and I know I was scarlet red. And I wanted to kill him in the worst way. I really did. And I remember this little voice in my brain saying, Sharon, you cannot kill an 80-year-old man on your first night at Esalen. You just can't. But what was I going to do?
Well, yeah, he was transgressing
Yes.
the boundaries there. There were other stories of that. We should say something about who Fritz Perls was. He was the developer, originator of Gestalt therapy. It was a very influential type of therapy. And
The story is his wife actually developed it.
Laura Perls.
Yes.
Yeah. And so you have a personal misadventure story with him.
So anyway, I was so angry at him that I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to do with all that emotion. So I simply left. And I said to my boyfriend, I'm leaving and I'm probably never coming back. And left. Well, when I went back to college, the Black Panthers had shut my school down. I didn't have any place to go, and it was too late to transfer. So I called my boyfriend and said, can I stay with you for, I don't know, a few weeks? And then I'm going back to school, So he said he'd love that. So I went down to Esalen. Esalen gave me a job in the kitchen where I met Neil Powers. Because Neil Powers was the cook. So,
Neil later became a Rolf and a Rolfing instructor as well.
oh yes, he's working with the Guild for Structural Integration now. And I'm on their advisory board, which is wonderful. But that's how I got there. And Esalen, after being there a while, I've realized that it was the place I'd really been looking for. Instead of college, this was a place where you got the newest information on psychology and philosophy and all kinds of wonderful things. It was a fantastic opportunity. And I decided to stay.
We've done a pretty good job so far actually of introducing the Esalen Institute, but a lot of people might not even know what it is. But I think you just described it. It was the springboard for a lot of the cultural interest in psychology, somatics, body work, movement, that kind of thing. That's what was happening at that point.
Well, Price and Michael Murphy founded it. It was Michael Murphy's land. And right after he graduated from Stanford University, his parents died. And he inherited Esalen as a property. He and his brother Dennis inherited the property. And Michael, because Esalen had buildings on it and a hot springs and a big lodge that you could cook and all that stuff, he and his friend Dick Price, who also missed Stanford University, decided they would start their own. And they wanted to get these people coming in, and they opened it up to see if anybody else wanted to do it. And boy, a lot of people did. So that got started in the 60s. I believe it was 64 or so.
61, 62. That's the year I was born. So I remember noticing that. Like Esalen started about the same time I did.
Yeah. Yeah, it was something else. It was a wonderful place. Alan Watts, Joseph Campbell, you name it. We had all kinds of wonderful people. Richard Feynman came down and taught us physics. It was incredibly wonderful. Just a delight in learning of all sorts. And that's what made it wonderful. The very latest stuff. And Stanford University has a program where they bring people in that are innovators in the field to teach their undergraduates. And this is what Michael Murphy and Dick Price based Esalen on. So,
well, it was a successful experiment. It's still going. I was privileged enough to live there about 5 years myself, off and on, and then later involved with my colleague Stephen Skateforder in their 40-year anniversary retrospective, where we went back and looked at what had happened and how it was working at that point. And that's been a while. That's so now that was like 20 years ago that happened as well. All right. So then amongst the other people that were getting started there was Ida Rolf.
yes.
And she probably came about that time, about 1970 or so, I believe. And you ended up working with her.
She was there a little earlier. I was actually actively avoiding her.
Why was that? Bad experiences with her as well? Is that
Yeah, no, I was definitely avoiding her because I had a girlfriend that lived there, and she came into those baths, and as she put her leg into the bath, right, it was black and blue from the ankle to the groin all the way up, and seriously black and blue, not just a little bit. It was purple, black and blue, and black. And I looked at that and I thought, oh, that's nasty. But then the other leg comes in, and both of them were like that. And I said to her, I can understand damaging one side, but both? How did you do that? She says, oh, I got Rolf. No, actually, it wasn't. She said nobody used that word right then. So she said, I got, some structural integration work. And I looked at her and I said, you let them do that to you? Are you nuts? Right? No. She says, oh, but my legs are so much better. And I looked at her legs really, really carefully. And I said to her, looks the same to me. And that Rolf had to be a hypnotist to get people to put up with that and think it was wonderful. And I decided I wasn't going to get anywhere near her. So if I ever saw her coming, I would go far away.
You're giving us some great examples of the things we hopefully learned from in that era and have evolved beyond. But your first encounter with that was through bruising. So then how did you connect the dots? How did you eventually study with Ida Rolf?
Well, Lars and I broke up after about, a couple years. It was a very amicable parting. And he stayed with the massage school. Esalen had offered me a job teaching massage at that point. Now, I had just certified like the week before they asked me. And I said to them, surely somebody better than me. I just realized I've just certified. I don't know if I can do it. I said to them, and they said, we want you. And I said, well, okay, but I'll make you a program. But if you don't like it, you have to tell me. So I produced a program to teach Esalen massage, and they liked it. So I did that for about 7 years. And then Rolf came along with a class. Now, the reason I joined her is because I'd started a relationship with Hector Prestera, who was an MD at Esalen. He'd just come. And we sort of fell in love. It was wonderful. And he was invited by Dr. Rolf to come and study structural integration. We had to go to Los Angeles for it. She wasn't having classes there yet. So we went down to Los Angeles for him to study, and I was introduced to her. She decided she wanted to get away from the classroom, so she used me as an excuse to go have some tea. She made me a cup of tea because I didn't know how to make tea. She made me a cup of tea, and we talked for a while, and people had said how scary she was, and I thought she was wonderful. Well, I was going around doing other things, and I thought to myself, it might be more interesting to do something where you have a puzzle with structure as opposed to just doing Esalen massage, which is wonderful, lovely, but you're not really doing anything other than repeating a pattern. You're putting people into an alpha state for a couple of hours. So I thought to myself, I wonder if she'd train me. And she had just come out with the guidelines of she wasn't training any more women. She wasn't training anybody under 140 pounds. You had to be 26 years old and have a college degree. And I didn't qualify for any of it. But I asked her anyway, just in case she would accept me, I would go do those things. And she just looked me over for what seemed like forever. And then she said, I'll train her, put her in the next class to Rosemary Fidus, who was her secretary.
She didn't answer you. She told Rosemary, but you were in.
To me, she just turned to Rosemary and says, I'll train her, put her in the next class. And that was it.
This is fun to hear because it was probably 15 years later or so that I ended up getting an exemption from the age requirement, the college degree requirement at that time, and a few things. And I started training at 24. And
So we're both excited about that. Yeah. So I went to class at the River House at first because she wasn't teaching at Esalen. And I trained both classes at the River House, which is burned down and gone now, but it was lovely.
there in Big Sur, yeah.
And then about, 2 years later or so, I decided that it wouldn't hurt me to repeat because, I could certainly learn more and I might have a question or two. So I repeated the class again on practitioner level. So I practitioned at River House, and then I practitioned a second time in 72. And then because I visited classes on occasion because you were welcome to always visit a class.
And then you probably a lot of things happened, but eventually you made some contributions to working with scars. That's how I first heard about your work. Some of my people that were studying with me or even assisting in my trainings had studied with you and says, this is really cool scar work we learned from Sharon Wheeler. I didn't know you at that time.
Yeah.
That come about.
When Hector started his practice in Monterey Carmel, I ran it. I did everything. It took 6 people to replace me, and I am talking about, insurance work for a doctor and for the practice, everything. I did all the paperwork, everything. I ran the practice. I was raising 2 of his kids, which weren't mine, but I got them the day I graduated from Rolf in class. I had 2 little ones, ages 2 and 4, to take care of, right like that. And I didn't know how to change a diaper. I had to ask him, show me how, because I've never done it. So I got his kids, and that's what I was doing. I was essentially having dinner parties for, 20 people, raising children, taking care of everything, doing it all. It was too much for me. I sort of had what I would call a moment of psychosis.
Sounds like a lot.
Well, after that, I decided I would go to the East Coast where Jack Worsley would see me because he was doing acupuncture, because Hector was learning acupuncture to treat with. And so I did. I left the relationship with him.
And let's just get some context here. Hector Prestero was, if I remember right, the co-author of The Body Reveals and one of the early physicians involved in the somatic scene, and really brought some of our groundwork understanding of somatics, the ways that the body and the psyche and soul relate to that work.
The winner went on to do Hakomi.
Hakomi, that's right, with Ron Kurtz. And then Worsley was was he the founder of what was his school? I'm just trying to remember. Did he start an acupuncture school?
He did it. It was in Columbia, Maryland.
Okay.
Just to the East Coast, because he said he went to Columbia, Maryland more often than anything else. He'd treat me. So from that episode I decided I didn't want that to ever happen again. And so Worsley treated me when I was in Columbia, Maryland, because he went there frequently. This is with the Bob Duggan and Diane Connolly, I believe that was her name. And they started that school, and I went there. And then I just stayed on the East Coast for the next 27 years.
And ScarWork emerged at some point. What's the story that happened?
Because of a lady who was in Hector's in my office. She was our receptionist. And she had been in a car accident and had damaged her leg. Essentially, she'd broken her both femurs, but one femur was through the knee, and that didn't do well. The fibula had rolled behind the knee, and she couldn't bend her leg, and she was on painkillers and muscle relaxants by noon every single day. She saw people coming in because when I designed the office with the architect, I made a big room so that we could have either a tank, John Lilly's isolation tank. We're friends with John Lilly as well. So either that, or I could have a structural integration practice there. So
Lilly developed the isolation tanks. We just should bookmark these figures as they float through our story. He was the originator of that idea and a lot of other interesting things.
He really was.
Yeah.
He was lots of fun. And we did lots of wonderful things with him. In fact, after he moved to Los Angeles, we spent every full moon with John Lilly for a couple of years. We'd go down and be in Los Angeles with him. It was a lot of fun.
His dolphin history was amazing and everything else. But he was sure we could communicate with dolphins. And then he gave up the idea that we could learn their language. He thought they're much smarter than us. Maybe they can learn ours.
He said they were about, 3 times smarter than we were, and whales were about 5. Don Lilly was the man that did all the dissection on mammals, big mammals. So whales and dolphins that washed ashore, he would go and dissect them. He knew more about brains and animals and humans than any person ever.
He also was, if I remember right, the first person who slowed down whale sounds enough to realize they were communicating, and there were actually discrete words essentially in their vocabulary that they reused again and again. He kind of broke some of the code of whale sounds and realized it was communication.
Not just that, he had recordings, reel-to-reel tape. You remember those old reel-to-reel tapes? They were about 1.5 feet across, big whole thing. He had a studio. It wasn't a studio. It was a laboratory in Puerto Rico, where he had a part of the coast you could have the dolphins in and close off an area so that they had a place that they were captured and fresh water was always there. So they were in the ocean, but they made a channel that the dolphins could swim up and come into a building where they could join the dolphin in a saltwater swimming pool. And they did these huge recordings. John Lilly took me and played the recording. They were trying to communicate with the dolphin, but he finally realized that dolphins have 3 separate communicational channels that they can use at the same time, and that was going to be too complicated for humans. So this dolphin that they were working with spoke English through the blowhole, and it said, "Dip the ball and let's go," as clear as a bell. You could hear it. It was interesting. At some point, John decided to dump those tapes because there were boxes and boxes of them. And I remember him putting them in the garbage at the top of the path that came out from the other side of the property. You went down into the canyon, crossed the river, and that was the other side of the property where people lived. It wasn't yet part of Esalen. That was Dennis Murphy's area. And Mike had the Esalen across the river to the south. So John had dumped all these tapes. And I went out and I saw it. Oh my God, those are John's tapes. That's, you can't be throwing them away. So I start to gather them up, and I saw a couple of friends walking away with one of those reels, and I said, "Oh, you must, please, you can't take that." I said, "That's John Lilly's, and he's going to want them back." So I gathered it all up, and I stored them at the Motel South Coast, which Esalen had acquired. I put them in a storage room. I asked Dick Price for help, and he says, "Oh, we can put them here." I put them there. 3 years later, John Lilly says to me, "I really wish I hadn't thrown those tapes away." And I just gave him a big smile and I said, "Come with me. I want to show you something." So we went down to South Coast, and I went to where I'd stored them. I opened the door, and there were all his tapes. He couldn't believe I'd done it for him. He was so happy. But that's how he got his tapes back with that little thing. It was historic. It really was amazing. But that had happened in Puerto Rico before he came to Esalen a long time.
There's a lot of stories in that place, and it sounds like you were involved in a good number of them. Yeah. Okay, so what is ScarWork anyway?
So the lady that was the receptionist with this leg, I was doing structural integration on her, and I got to the third session, and I'm supposed to make that knee travel forward and back, straight forward and straight back, that whole business. I couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it. I got the first side great, the side she hadn't, they'd broken on the other side. That was a mid-leg break, but the one through the knee, I just couldn't do it. And I had asked Dr. Rolf sometime earlier, is there something special you would do with scars? And she said, no, just ignore them and establish the function. That's what she said to me. Sometimes,
Ignore the scar, focus on function.
yeah, forget the scar, never mind. We can't do anything with it. Just go for function. But you know what? It was the scar that was the problem. They'd done 5 surgeries to the same site, and that scar was this massive broke, and it had the knee caught and stuck. And I thought, well, if I could just soften it up a little bit, just a little bit, maybe I could get my structural integration done. So I said to her, I don't know how to do this. Nobody's ever taught me about scars. So I'm just going to do something. And I said to her, does that hurt? She says, no, that doesn't hurt. I said, phew, great. I said, let's just do this a bit, and soften it up, and maybe we'll get something. So I wasn't paying attention. We were talking because it didn't hurt, discussing movies and Marilyn Monroe, actually. And I'm doing this stuff, and I stop my work periodically so that I am sure that I'm doing what I think I'm doing. And what do you know? It was, changed. This scar had a gap in it of probably half an inch between the 2 sides. It was very long, very tough, very discolored, and very glued down. And the part that I had done, not knowing what I was doing, had joined, the 2 sides had joined, it had smoothed out, ripples on either side had smoothed out, became the right color, became pliant, and she got sensation. She hadn't had sensation in that leg for 15 years, which was the last surgery we had was 15 years before I got a hold of her. So the sensation came back, and it was functional. She could straighten her knee. She could stand on it. Everything was fine. Couldn't believe it. And I thought, wow. And when I first did this, I'd only done a little section of that, the bottom half of that scar. I hadn't done all of it. And when I started to work again, I realized I didn't remember anything I had done. I went, oh no, I don't remember what I did. But I said to myself, well, your hands were just in there. Just put them in there and let them go. That's what I did. I put my hands down. And every now and again, I'd peek because they were shy. They didn't want to be looked at, even by me. And so if I'd look at my hands, they'd freeze up. And I went, okay, can't look at it. I'm not looking. And my hands would go back and it would start again. And I would manage to match up the entire scar and finish it. And that's how I learned to do scar work, was watching my own hands, because it wasn't logical.
Adjusting your hands. I'm realizing at this point, maybe I should ask you about the story you told me when I first met you about being an artistic experiment for Dr. Rolf.
Yeah, because I couldn't figure out. Now, Al Drucker was also at Esalen. He was the aerospace engineer.
He was my first structural integration teacher, by the way.
Well, there you go. So Al was a friend of mine before I got to Rolf in class, because she used to embarrass him and other people with me. She thought I was hysterically funny because here I was. She made sure I didn't know anatomy and physiology. Esalen massage doesn't have any anatomy and physiology. We have heads, we have tummies, there's feet, no anatomy whatsoever. And I didn't learn any. And she wanted it like that. She knew that. And she wanted me not to know it. That's why she put me in class real quick so I couldn't study up. I tried to read an anatomy book, but it took me 4 days of reading that anatomy book to understand the first 4 pages.
You were just trying to self-study anatomy. She threw you into a class without the anatomical background she was asking for from other people.
That's right.
She exempted you from that as well.
She told me. In fact, every time, I was noticing, because I had 3 doctors in my class. There was Hector, and there was, Fritz Smith of Zero Balance. And there was
originated Zero Balancing, passed away recently. Yeah.
Yeah, he did. And the other fellow, that was the other doctor, because we were friends with all the doctors.
Robert Hall? Sorry. Who's the other doctor?
Yeah, there was another doctor that was on the coast. Because Hector and I, when we were at Esalen, we did backcountry medicine. I would hold flashlights. He would deliver the baby, And when people rolled off their road down into the canyon and got all cut up, they would be brought to us, because taking them an hour to Carmel, Monterey would mean they wouldn't make it. So we would.
And Peter Or it might have been Robert Hall, who I later spent a lot of time studying with, or it might have been Peter Harding. But in any case,
Nope, it was another one. He died early. He died before Esalen, before I left Esalen. We just knew him for a couple of years, and I forget his name. I'm sorry to say. Well, anyway.
So you were an artistic experiment. You find yourself working on someone with scars. You trusted your hands. You didn't make them shy by looking at them too much. And
Nope.
lo and behold, things happened.
It worked. But I thought everybody already knew how to do this because there are schools of massage, a couple anyway. They didn't have schools of massage, but there were one or two. And they had a class on scar tissue. And I thought, gee, I never took that class. But I found it anyway, you know? I assumed they'd found it. I didn't say anything about scar tissue work for, 30 years.
Hmm.
And I just simply did it and did it and did it. I got good at it. And I learned all kinds of different ways. Again, my hands, I trust my hands. I would just let them go. And then I watch them and say, okay, that's how you fix that kind of problem. There's this and there's that. All the different little aspects and qualities of scars because people came to me for them. And I got a reputation for it among the Rolfers. So I started doing it. And I wrote somebody on the East Coast wanted to know how to fix this thing or that thing. And I wrote him out a description and I almost didn't send it because, and this is when computers were very, very new. I almost didn't send it because it sounded so stupid. I'm trying to put into words something that I'm doing that I don't know, right? You know? So I did anyway. I just sent it. And he wrote me back and said, it worked. And I said, you figured out how to do scar work from a piece of paper and words? I said, wow, that's great. And then I thought, I could teach that. The people can understand it. I could still, use the same language and talk about it and people get it. Well, then I'll spread it around a little bit. So I had my very first class. My brother was in it actually. And we did that. And I was able to teach it to people. And I thought, oh, great, it's teachable too. Isn't that wonderful? But I went about my business, not thinking, again, still thinking it wasn't until 2009 or 07. It was 07 where Tom Findlay did the first Fascial Research Congress. Now, I knew Tom Findlay fairly well. He was my brother's best friend.
Wow.
Yeah, so I knew him right from the start. And in 1970, which was the year I trained in structural integration, I called up my brother and said, have I got the Christmas gift for you? 10 sessions of structural integration. So he said, great. He said, but why don't you do my best friend and his wife, and then there'll be more to do? Because I did my brother and his wife, and Tom Findlay and Tom's wife. Gave him 10 sessions up in Portland, they were at Reed College in Oregon. And that's when I did that work. And Tom Findlay set about to become a doctor and a researcher so he could research welfare.
Yes. Yeah, and he was one of the originators of the Fascial Research Congresses, which are still going.
He was
the originator, along with Robert Slape, yes.
He didn't have any help in the first one.
Okay.
Yes.
So,
because he's my friend, right? I went to that Fascial Research Congress on the very first one. And there he is standing against the wall with his arms folded, smiling at this huge, huge wave of people. We had, how many was it? 900 people that came. And he's smiling, and I came up to him, and I stood next to him and folded my arms and watched this flood of people going by. And I said, boy, you sure know how to throw a party, Tom. He says, you have no idea. And I said, so tell me. He says, well, in these situations, you pick a topic, and then you go to the leaders in the field, and you write letters to all of them because you want somebody that's famous to base your workshop around so people will come. And he said he did that, and they all came. So he had too many people, right? And then he advertised for it. And he says, normally you get 200 people at these events. He got 900. The time had come for fascia, right? So that was the first one that he did. And it was successful ever since. I'm going to go to the next one in New Orleans in August, which is a dreadful idea. But of course, the meeting rooms are expensive. So I'm pretty sure that's why they did it. But I've been to everyone except the second one, all those Fascial Research Congresses.
Second one was in Boston, perhaps?
It was in Berlin.
Berlin. Oh, yeah. Okay. Maybe I have been to all of them myself.
I couldn't afford Berlin, but I've been to everyone since. And enough, when I first went there, the topic of scars wasn't even there. they put up scars up on the wall. They said, we're going to put topics up on the wall. You go sit underneath the topic sign. I did first. And there was only one other person there. Interesting. Teacher Jan Schwarwatha.
And then later you presented some of your work there, some of your findings, if I remember right. I remember some ultrasounds or something.
I got some ultrasounds of the scar tissue work, and they actually published it at one point. I was going to write it up, but they just published it before I got a chance to. The pictures of the ultrasounds aren't with the information, so I'm sure that's why I didn't get any traction. But I did present.
Well, Wojtek, we should pull you in. Thanks for your patience so far. What should tell us about your involvement in scar work and anything else you think we should know about it?
I met Sharon around 2015 or 16 in Maine. And I did 2 classes with her. I think that were the first classes was the ScarWork and the BoneWork. And I always wanted to meet Sharon because I've heard about this lady that does something with the bones. And I was intrigued by this, how you can do something with the bone when with my medical training, I was taught that, if you don't have a saw or something really strong, you can't influence the bone at all. So I went and studied with Sharon, and scars has became like a part of the work that is right now inseparable from what I do. It's, if someone has a scar, I can't ignore it. I can't just deal with the structure and ignore the scar, or deal with function and ignore the scar. Because the scars are such a strong influencer of the function and how tissues are moving and sliding. And you know that I'm all about sliding and gliding of the tissues inside of the body.
In your own movement discipline, the Zoga movement, that's the theme, sliding between compartments, things like that.
Yeah. So I have been really fascinated with how tissues move inside of the body, and the scar tissue is something that is really very strong inhibitor of sliding properties of our layered body organization. We know that tissues cross over in many places, they overlap, they need to move, and every inflammation and healing process is creating a densification in more liquid-like sliding surfaces of the body, and then it's going to influence the mechanics of the area, but also because we are always a closed mechanical system, change in mechanics in one area will involve compensation and changes in the other areas. So scars have been part of the general assessment nearly, because if you have even a small scar that is in an important mechanical area of the body, it can create a lot of trouble. And so scars have become a big part of and since I met Sharon, I was so fascinated with this work with scars and with bone work that I just wanted to study more with her, and I started to bring her to Poland very early. For next year, since we met, she was already first time in Poland, and I started to organize classes for Sharon and learn more and more each year. And each time she was coming here, we've been exchanging sessions. We've been trying to work on my most complex clients that I couldn't figure out, and Sharon was helping me, guiding me through these processes. So I feel really privileged to spend so much time with Sharon and learn hand to hand from her.
That's great. We should probably describe the method a little bit. I mean, after your story of the woman climbing in the hot tub, Sharon, with bruises all over her legs, is that what, have you continued that tradition in your scar work?
Well, Dr. Rolf didn't leave bruises. This was done by one of her students who, when Dr. Rolf said go deeper, they pushed harder. But that's not it. Going to question of reaching and not shoving. So scar work is light, easy, and it just simply, because you stay light and easy and you don't hurt anybody, the tissue just unravels and goes back to where it belongs, which is very interesting. And I just work until the tissue's smooth. That was my whole goal with working on tissue, was that the scars are palpable in the flesh. They limit range of motion. They inhibit the nerve function. They do all kinds of interesting things. And with very, very light touch, you can get them to change very rapidly. So I was working with that and just using it to clear up the scars and teaching other people. Because to my surprise, I thought everybody knew how to do it. But it wasn't until the Fascia Research Congress that I realized that they didn't know anything about scars and that I should begin to push this forward, because when you do scar work on people, it makes a huge difference. And the thing that's the most interesting about it is that it continues working in the body at a very rapid rate. So when you do a session, there's enormous change after the session. And if you don't do any further work, it's incredible. Over years, you can get it. It just keeps going and going for the better. So very little input by a therapist leads you to an enormous change with time. And there was a lady that had cancer in the 1950s, I believe it was. At Stanford University, she had her surgery for breast cancer. And they had taken intercostal muscles because in those days they didn't know that that's not what you do. So they had stripped out everything. Her core side of the rib cage where they'd taken the breast off had just piles of scar tissue. It wasn't moving. She couldn't feel anything. All those things. And it had been 15 years since the last surgery. This was my receptionist. So I just started working on it, and darn it didn't work. And then I started applying that to other people, and it worked also. So I continued because it was a fascination of mine. And as I say, I thought everybody knew this worked, so I was just catching up. I didn't stop and think that I was the first, but apparently I am. So
Please go ahead.
So I just proceeded to start classes because I realized, because she had gotten such enormous change with work from me for a demonstration in my class, and then she became a class model, and she had huge change. 6 months later, it was just unbelievable. And I said, "How many sessions have you had?" She says, "Oh, just the work in class." And I went, "You only had 2 sessions and you look like this? I can't believe it." And then she grabbed me by the shoulders and she looked me right in the eye and she said, "You have to teach." And I said, "Yes, ma'am." So
you follow instructions, apparently, at least those instructions. And when you've said it a couple of times, but I just want to repeat it. When you say light pressure, you really mean light pressure, because Wojtek, you came and worked on my late wife, Loretta, and I was there by your side, working alongside with you. And your work was incredibly light, just feathering. And she perceived enormous benefit that indeed stayed with her for quite a while.
Yes, it does. It's very light. If you approach scar tissue with a lot of attitude that you're going to destroy it, it doesn't work. The body just simply kind of grabs the other tissue around it, it feels like, and tightens up, and you cannot get in. You can't do anything if you're hurting people. If they're guarded and tight and afraid of you, it's not going to work well.
So you're making things smooth. You're using light touch. You're thinking about their guarding and them. You don't want to work against yourself there.
No.
Is that, well, let me put it this way. How would you explain the results or what you see to someone who wanted more explanation? That might be enough explanation for you to say it's light work. I trust my hands. Do you have any sense of how you would explain it to someone who wanted more explanation, or would you?
Well, that was one of the problems. I don't know how it works exactly. And I don't think we still know. I don't think we do. But I've got a scientist who likes my work, Heike Jaeger. She's from Ulm University in Germany. Since Wojtek brought me over, I have been teaching different places. And Heike has told me that she thinks it has to do with the ion channels, because ion channels and pressure go together. Ion channels respond to temperature and touch. And this is Ardam Padapurian's work, Nobel Prize in 2021, I believe.
There's some There's some interesting possible explanations. That again, it strikes me again. You're just thinking about letting your hands do their thing. You're thinking about making it smooth. You're thinking about being delicate.
Yeah.
Probably a few other things.
Because when you hurt people, they tighten up and you can't get it. If they're tightening up and they're afraid of you, you're not going to be able to get that scar tissue loose. You lose a whole lot of possibilities. So if it's nice, light work that doesn't hurt and works very fast compared to everything else, Robert Schleip told me that the work that I do with scars is the fastest changing tissue he's ever seen anywhere in the world. So
Well, he's worked alongside you with his indentometer, checking
Yeah.
tissue qualities as you work, that kind of thing.
yeah,
Well, what I saw with Loretta and what I could imagine was that it certainly changed the way she felt there and the way she moved and I think the way she thought about the scars she had from her mastectomy. These are from mastectomy surgeries. And it was certainly changing her representational body in her experience to have that kind of focused, delicate attention.
what people say when you're done with the scar work is it feels like me again, which is a huge thing because people don't like their scars. That they're alien. Some people never touch their scars because it's such strange stuff, So people adopt their body back again. It becomes them again. It doesn't limit their range of motion. It doesn't hurt. It doesn't do anything. It's just gone. Now, I can't get rid of the surface line. Sometimes there's a little white line on the surface. I can't do that. But everything else underneath I can get to.
Any reconceptions about scars you want to offer for people that have scars or do scar work now?
It's simply tissue that's glued together. And I believe we're experts in body glue.
We're experts in body
Glue.
glue. That's what I thought you said. We're experts in body glue. Okay.
Yeah. When you cut the tissue, it leaks fluid, which turns to glue and sticks everything together. That's the healing process. They talk about it in all of your anatomy books and stuff. Will talk about the process of healing scars. Now, that's accurate, but they don't know how to get that glue gone. And it takes a light hand touch to get it done. If you push and pull at it and hurt people, they tighten up and you can't get it, or very little of it. And everybody rips and tears because scars are so tough. A scar in the body with a surgeon, when they're cutting, they cannot cut the scar with their scalpel that they've used a little bit. It has to be razor sharp to cut scars. And after a couple of movements with the scalpel, it's not razor sharp anymore because it dulls down. Scar tissue is very, very difficult to cut. It's a tremendous, tedious, time-consuming effort for the surgeon to go in where there's been a scar. They have to pick things apart very carefully because they can't see major nerves and blood vessels underneath the scarring. And they're liable to cut it if they just slash through there. And if you use a brand new scalpel, it's dull in a couple of moments. So you have to use brand new, fresh, razor-sharp scalpels to cut scar tissue. That's why everybody thinks you have to be, well, shall we say, extreme prejudice. You have to destroy it. So people rip and tear at them. Everybody rips and tears at them, except for me. I'm nice to them. And that's what.
And if I remember from your work, Wojtek, your intention was not just to pull it apart, but to bring it together somehow. Was that a good generalization?
It's mending tissue, not tearing it. The opposite. So it's opposite. It's not heavy touch. It's light touch. And we're mending rather than ripping.
Yeah. And bringing the tone towards the scar too, because when you cut and you destroy the integrated tension of this multi-layered pressure system as it's our body, those tissues are like the tension goes to the sideways away from the scar. So you want to bring that tension back towards the scar. So it's going to get normalized tone in the area that has been wounded.
What about bone work? What would you like to tell us about bone work before we wrap up the conversation?
Well, that's another one I discovered more or less by accident. I had a 4-year-old boy, and he had broken his leg at 2. It was 30 degrees off, and the mother had had it cast by the doctor, but it came out 30 degrees off because in those days it was traditional not to straighten out the bones of a child before putting a cast on. The doctor just cast it and left it crooked and cast it, and it came out 30 degrees off. And that child had lived for a couple of years with that. He was 4 when I got a hold of him. And this was a famous inventor's family, which I need to get permission to use their name. I'm not going to say it, but it was they were great friends of mine. And she brought in her little 4-year-old for me to work on. And 4 years old is a difficult age to work on. And I decided that, I was going to do my best, but he was probably going to scream. Well, he fell asleep that day during the session. He was used to me. It was a hot day. And so he fell asleep. And I worked on him asleep. And when I was finished with my structural integration session, the 4th hour line, he was still sleeping. And Dr. Rolf had said that was your golden opportunity to do the thing they would never let you do when they were awake. And I'm looking him over for the golden opportunity, and I'm looking at that little leg, and I thought to myself, it's straighter. I know it is. It's 2 or 3 degrees, but it's straighter. I wonder if fascia holds the bone in place, the scar tissue, So I went over, and I put one hand on the top of the brake, and I put my other hand on top of that, and I leaned into it to see if I could feel those bones. And I held still because I was trying to feel. Now, structural integration, you're never not moving. You're moving before you get on, and you're moving when you're coming off. It's always movement, movement, movement. So I just sat there, and all of a sudden, I felt change generate from nothing. I just was not moving for minutes, I think. And all of a sudden, that little leg started to change. And structural integration, you jump on change and ride it like a surfboard. And that's what I did for this, right? I jumped on the change rate. I rode it. That little leg went from 30 degrees off to about 3 degrees in 7 to 8 seconds. Now, I took my hands off that little leg and I backed up to go sit down on my little bench again to look at it. I actually didn't make it. I was in shock, and I actually fell on the floor. My legs wouldn't hold me up. So I crawled over to my bench and got up there and I looked at it and I said, it was straight. It had been 30 degrees off, and here it is 3 degrees. And I thought, oh, dear Lord, I broke it. I had to have broken it because that's the only way you can change a bone, right? Either break it or not. And I went over and I tried to feel it again to see if there was an extra joint in the middle of his lower leg. It was solid. And I thought, I guess I didn't break the bones. And I thought, oh, when he gets up, he's going to break it. So I woke up the mom, who was also sleeping on the table. And I said, I talked to her for a bit and I said, let's wake up your son and see how he is, right? Well, I was hovering over the table and I wasn't his favorite person. So he made this little yelping sound and got himself up and ran to the far end of the table, stood on the corner and jumped up into the air and landed on his legs. And I went, oh, that's going to do it. He's going to break it. But he didn't. And he must have done that 20 times. And then he stood up at the very end and I said to his mother, I said, take a look at his left leg and tell me what you think. Because I thought I must be sleeping or something, dreaming, this doesn't happen. And she looked at his leg and said, oh, that's better. Thank you. Oh, you're welcome. And I went running to Dr. Rolf, who happened to be teaching at Esalen then. We gave her a classroom and everything. And place to live, all that. We would have built her a house. We offered to host her and build a house there. She didn't want it. She liked New York. But, so I asked her, what happened? What happened? Figuring she knows everything, right? And she said, I have absolutely no idea. And I went, oh dear, now I'm on my own with this. And how do you talk about it? So I started asking all the doctors, have you ever come across this? Because by then we're in Carmel, Monterey doing a medical practice. I'm running it and doing everything. And I asked people, and all my doctor friends would look at me and kind of go, well, obviously I'm crazy, right? Talking about this. And some of them, I lost some friends talking about it because they thought it was crazy. But I finally decided, because Craig Enright, who was the doctor at Esalen after us, Craig Enright said that, strange things happen with small children. So that was what I had to go with. That's all. Because medicine does. In medicine, it's true. Strange things happen with small children. And this had to have been one of those. And I figured, well, I'll never see it again. How interesting. But I couldn't forget how it felt. And I found somebody that had a spiral fracture in their finger in the first joint of it near the knuckles that they'd gotten doing Aikido. They'd gotten their finger caught in the Aikido robes that tightened down as they threw the person. It twisted and took the finger with it. So they're standing and the finger goes over. And so the spiral fracture, and it was thicker. You could see shards of bone in it, everything. I did the compression that you do, the gripping and pushing that you do with the bone work, and it straightened out in seconds, just like the little boy. 7 to 8 seconds is what it takes to get that to change when you get one of these breaks like this. And that's blazing fast. Talk about fast. That's fast. So I thought to myself, good heavens. And I started telling people about it in the medical world, and they kept sort of avoiding me. Like I was completely crazy, right? Sigh. I became the crazy bone lady talking about this. But my scar work was great. So people would invite me for scar work. I'd start to talk about that. Tom Findlay, who started that FASTA Research Society, every time I talk about bones, he'd roll his eyes like, you can't do that. And I said, Tom, just me. What are you talking about? You know me forever, right? Would I lie about this? Are you crazy? But he couldn't get his head wrapped around it. So he would dismiss it every time. So it's one of those things that you can't get any traction on, except I couldn't give it up. And I realized at a certain point that I might be the only one that knows this. So I started to try to teach it. Now, I thought that this fast, rapid change in the break was the way to go, but it turns out there's other things you can do with bones. So I learned a couple other things, and I did something where a bone is stuck on someplace it shouldn't be. And I could get that tissue to let go and return massive amounts of function. So it's not just the reforming of the structure of the bone. It's where you can get the bones that are stuck to each other where they shouldn't be. You can get that apart and you get massive change. Those two things gave me a class to teach. Because the other stuff that happens in seconds, how are you going to teach a class? How many people do you have to find with mangled, untreated bones that are crooked to be able to get a class, because it goes in seconds? So this other stuff doesn't. So I had two aspects of bones I could teach. So I could teach the work because it appeared to me that nobody else knew it, and I couldn't just let it go because it did such wonderful things.
You two, I think, were just in Ukraine. Is that right? Were you there together?
We were working with soldiers.
Working with soldiers.
Yes.
Were you training? Were you treating? What was the trip like? Tell us something about that.
I taught them bone work, which was huge.
Yeah.
Yes. Because we can do bones that are just, it's impossible in the normal view of bones, but it's not impossible. And they're open to us. So,
yeah.
It's
when the war started and everybody was trying to find a way to do any help. And I have a friend who invited me to Lviv before the war. I was on the conference in Lviv in 2018. And this is where I met Christina, who is our host in Lviv. And when the war started, I wanted to do something for them. So we have organized first a set of webinars for them, just to give them something to focus on rather than just sitting in the basements very often when there are the bomb alarms. So we did that. And after that, I talked to Christina that I want to come and teach them ScarWork. And when Sharon heard this, she's like, I'm going. So we went there already. I think it was our 5th time this time. So first time it was always the ScarWork, but this time we taught them BoneWork. Last time I've been there, I gave them little information about the cranial work. So we are doing like charity workshops. Everybody from Ukraine can come, and they don't need to pay for the class. They just give a little donation for soldiers. And it's amazing to see how appreciative they are, and how much it can change how they are. So it's a great thing to do.
That's inspiring that you're finding ways to contribute and participate in pain at a bigger level as well.
You bet.
Now you're gonna come, the two of you are going to come to Thailand and be a part of our experience there. And I'm hoping we can tempt you to stay even longer than a little bit, Sharon. But I'm really looking forward to having that time with each of you there.
Oh, I'm tempted. Make no mistake about it. But I don't do well in hot weather, so I'll see if I survive it.
We're gonna have to see how it goes, but it's gonna be great to have that time with you both there in Thailand. What would you like to leave us with? What suggestion, thought, concept do you think would be a good one to end on?
I think there's more to the human body that we've discovered. I think we can contribute this information. And I think that if you accept the work, the scars and the bones, if you accept that as a possibility, it's going to open doors for us to research because people don't know you can do this. And I'm not the only one that can do it. So it has nothing to do with me. Everybody can figure this out and work with it. So, it's going to help us, and we're going to have a whole bunch of interest in science come out of it. We will. And I love science, so, I'm up for it.
Thank you, Sharon. Closing thoughts, Wojtek?
Yeah, and I'm gonna be one of those people who are gonna push the research forward. We have set up the foundation to have money for the research, and I'm organizing a group of very interesting doctors and researchers around this project, and we're gonna try to show and present to the world that with mechanical input you can influence not only tone or tension in the body, but also distorted tissues and tissues that has changed their morphology and architecture. So, yeah, there is more to come and more to know.
Well, thank you. Thank you both for the conversation and the time today. Sharon, we'll put your website into the show notes. Anything else you want to mention to people about how to find out more about you and your work?
Well, there is a website that has not just classes that I do, but I'm training people to teach because I'm older, So when I'm out of here, I want this work to stay for everybody. So I've organized myself and I'm teaching as much as I possibly can over my last years.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time to talk to us. Let me thank our sponsors today, too. The Thinking Practitioner podcast is supported by ABMP, Associated Bodywork and Massage Professionals. ABMP membership gives professional practitioners like you a package including individual liability insurance, free continuing education, quick reference apps, online scheduling and payments with Pocket Suite, and much more. ABMP CE courses, podcast, and Massage and Bodywork magazine always feature expert voices and new perspectives in the profession, including articles by my colleague Whitney Lowe, who is not here with us today, and myself. Thinking Practitioner listeners can save on joining ABMP at abmp.com/thinking. Stop by our sites, Whitney's and mine, for the show notes, the video from this episode, transcripts, extras. Whitney's site is academyofclinicalmassage.com. My site, advanced-trainings.com. And we would like to hear from you, hear how the episode was for you, hear about your suggestions and requests for future episodes. You can email us at info@thethinkingpractitioner.com or look for us on social media under our names. My name is Til Luchau or Whitney Lowe. My colleague will be back in the next episode. Go check out our YouTube channel and rate us on Apple Podcasts, please, as it does help other people find the show. And you can hear us wherever you listen, Spotify, etc. So please do share the word, share the episode, and tell a friend. Thanks, everybody.
Books of Discovery has been part of massage therapy education for over 20 years. Thousands of schools around the world teach with their textbooks, e-textbooks, and digital resources. Books of Discovery likes to say, learning adventures start here. They see that same spirit here on the Thinking Practitioner podcast, and they're proud to support our work, knowing we share the mission to bring massage and bodywork community enlivening content that advances our profession. Check out their collection of e-textbooks and digital learning resources for pathology, kinesiology, anatomy, physiology at booksofdiscovery.com, where Thinking Practitioner listeners like you save 15% by entering Thinking at checkout. Thanks, Books of Discovery. Thanks to all of our sponsors. Stop by our sites for the video of this conversation, the show notes, transcripts, and extras. Whitney's site, academyofclinicalmassage.com. My site, advanced-trainings.com. If you have comments, questions, or things you'd like to hear us talk about, just record a short voice memo on your phone and email it to us at info@thethinkingpractitioner.com. We might even play it on the air, or look for us on social media at our names, at Whitney Lowe or at Til Luchau. Rate us, please, on Apple Podcasts, as it really does help people find the show and helps our sponsors know that their support is worthwhile. You can find us on Spotify, Stitcher, Podbean, or wherever else you listen. Please do share the word, tell a friend. Thanks for listening.